Well, people are joining us, so I will go ahead and start. Hey, everyone. I'm Jerry Portwood, if you don't already know, and we're on the Queer Love podcast. And today's guest is the wonderful author and historian, Hugh Ryan. You probably know him from his deep dives into public queer spaces and his award winning books, When Brooklyn Was Queer and The Women's House of Detention. But we're going to be talking mainly about his new memoir, My Bad, which is deeply personal. You're going to get, if you haven't already listened to it or read it, you're going to get radical honesty, a lot of 90s dance floors, and unblinking look at non monogamy. It's vulnerable, it's sharp, and it helps redefine what a successful relationship looks like, I think. So we're going to talk about that as well. Um, and I've been waiting a while to talk to you about this, Hugh. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I feel like we've known each other for so long, like before many of the events in the memoir, and yet haven't really sat down for anything like this ever. So this is exciting.
I know. Yeah, I know. We've known each other for quite a while. You used to write for me at New York Press, and we even get a little shout out in the book. So I was like, "Oh, look, he even remembers New York Press," because that doesn't exist anymore. And when I even put it in my bio, I think people don't know what it is. So
It's so sad. I miss all of those like indie local presses. The indie papers were a great thing.
well, I knew that it was over when I had somebody who worked with me who said that she wouldn't touch the boxes and she wouldn't touch the paper because it made her hands dirty. And I was like, okay, this is obviously a different generation, a
Ah,
different vibe. Because
yeah.
I remember how cool I thought it was coming to New York before I moved here and being able to pick them up. And that's really what's so fun. I mean, I was so jealous. I did not visit New York until I was in college, and it was in the mid 90s. So the same time you were coming to New York, but you had much more access and did a lot more fun things. So for people who don't know, you were coming into the city, putting your clothes into a
Mhm.
plastic bag so they didn't smell, putting them in a locker at Penn Station because you could still do that, and then went partying all night.
Yes, although not Penn Station. I was always coming into Grand Central because I was coming in
Oh,
on the
right.
Metro North, not the LIRR or the Amtrak.
Right.
But it was great. This was pre 9/11. There were places where you could rent a locker for like 50 cents, a dollar, and just leave your luggage for a weekend, you know? So I would come down from the suburbs, or if I was in school up at Cornell, there were buses that would come down. You could lock all your stuff away. And I would, yeah, it was Ziploc baggies that I would put a fresh T-shirt in, so that after I was out dancing all night, when there was still smoking in the clubs, you'd leave. I had really long hair. There was nothing I could do about getting the smell out of my hair, but I could at least have like clean, fresh clothes in a bag so I could leave, change immediately. Because often I didn't have anywhere exactly to go after that. I was just kind of wandering around. I might go to brunch with folks from the um, clubs, or I might just like kill time in Grand Central till the train started or until businesses opened up again. And so it was kind of necessary to like do something to make myself smell better.
I actually love that you mentioned it too, because I've been teaching this summer class, it's a opinion writing class at the New School, and my students the other day were advocating for smoking to be allowed in places again, and I was like, "Yeah, you guys don't remember what it was like, because when we'd go out, I literally had to like air out my clothes because there was no way you could escape."
It made everything disgusting. I gotta say, a lot of things I miss from the 90s. Smoking in clubs, not one of them.
Exactly. Well, I want to dive in. One of the favorite lines that I have from the book, which I'm going to read, partly I've been giving some lectures and presentations this summer, and I just felt like this summed up something that I had been trying to articulate, and you did it so beautifully in the book. So I want to read this line and talk about it. As you write, queerness is a fickle blessing. Unlike religion, ethnicity, class, or race, it's rarely shared between parents and children or neighbor with neighbor. Queer people don't often grow up experiencing gatherings of others like us. And when we create those gatherings as adults, they are more likely to be diverse out of necessity. And you go on to talk about how obviously anybody can screw that up. But I love that you wrote that, and it is so true, and something I think many people, especially straight people, never think about, right? That most of them at least could relate to the people that are their family, their biological family, or they had something in common, even if they didn't believe the same thing. So, tell us a little bit about that statement.
Yeah, I think a lot about the difference between what you might call vertical identities and horizontal identities. Vertical identities are the ones that pass from parents to children. Your national identity is often a vertical identity. Your racial identity is often a vertical identity. Religious identity. There are these things we have in common with our, like quote unquote bloodline. Horizontal identities are different. They are more epigenetic. They show up in not in lines. So queerness is obviously one of them. Different kinds of ability and disability, dwarfism, like these are things that may or may not show up in a family tree, but most likely you don't have them shared with the people you are being raised in and around and with. And those create different kinds of solidarities, different kinds of possibilities. I think one of the amazing things about queer people generally is that because we are often unlike the people around us and have to go looking for people like us who are like us in one way, but they weren't raised where we were. They didn't have the same beliefs. They are coming with a whole other set of ideas. And it's not like we necessarily, you can always go and find people who are just like you, even though they came from a different place. But it gives us the opportunity to find different people, to connect with them, to be exposed to new ideas, to make new solidarities, to see our own situations from a different light and to make new possibilities. And I think that's why, like everything from the way, queer people often get called stylish or, on the front lines of culture. Well, it's partially because we are meeting people from lots of different places and walks of life and identities through our queer identity. So we're being brought into all of these new ideas and possibilities. And I think it's so constitutive of queer life, the fact that we aren't generally, not always, but, raised by queer people like us.
Right. You also do a really great job of explaining. I think one thing, part of this is you being a historian and not wanting to dwell in presentism and understanding how things have changed, but you also deal with the fact that the language has changed and gender expression, which you get into quite a bit. We didn't have all the language, we didn't have all of the connections, and even the word queer. I mean, the fact that we use it now wasn't something that I grew up using in a positive way, and it wasn't something really I started incorporating into my life until probably the last decade and a half or something. And so even that was really great that um, you don't assume that everybody that you remind us that not everybody understood even those basic things, and that and you really did question your gender expression and gender identity, and that was part of what drove you through so much of what you did in the 90s and as you were growing up, while you were exploring what you who you were trying to be and who you wanted to be with.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like it's not even just that language has changed, though of course the language has changed, but I think we've been through this like incredible sea change in how people live generally. The internet has sort of transformed how we think and act and connect with one another, and that has changed our lives entirely in a way that I think is only comparable to urbanization in the late 19th century. And
Mhm.
because these changes happen, we find each other in different ways, we think about ourselves in different ways, and the language changes and how we understand ourselves changes. So, if the way I like to think about it is that queer people, of course, always existed, right? Same sex desire, cross gender desire, all of this always existed. But what it means and how we interpret it changes as the world changes. So, when urbanization happens in America, 19th century, suddenly all of these people have been kind of invisible in like the gender segregated world before that. Gender normative homosexuals as we think of them today. They see each other, and seeing each other, they realize they're a community. And then people from the outside see them and they name them based on the things that are obvious, right? Binary sexual object choice, identification with one of two, straight genders. That's because of how power existed, right? The queer community is there. We're finding each other, but how we get to name ourselves has to go through people from the outside. The internet comes along in the 90s, and this is happening alongside you and I growing up, so it's hard to even see it happening, but it changes how we connect to one another, and it allows people who maybe didn't see themselves under the queer umbrella previously to find one another, or folks who did see themselves under that umbrella but felt that their ideas, their lives didn't neatly fit with being gay or being trans. Ideas like being non-binary, right, start to come up in this moment, and the internet enables queer people ourselves to create new language and spread that language and find each other without waiting for gatekeepers. And so it's not just that the language has changed, but the kind of identities that we sit inside, like the basic question of, is an identity based on sexuality just who you are attracted to? or
Okay.
how that attraction happens for you. That's the question of identity of the 21st century, I think. And by that I mean, because it can sound really like pie in the sky, artsy fartsy, metaphorical, but like in the 90s, I dated guys who were equally attracted to men and women and had relationships with both. I dated guys who and they called themselves bisexual. I dated guys who had no physical attraction to anyone and called themselves bisexual and dated men, women. I dated guys who called themselves straight and had mostly relationships with women, but on drugs or in certain sexual situations would have sex with men. Right? All of these people in the 20th century would have been under the label bisexual, whether or not they claimed it themselves. But the actual process of those desires and what it was like from the inside is very different. And those people are now able to find themselves and ask questions like, am I asexual? Right?
Right.
Am I sapiosexual? Am I? And so I think it's like not only is the language changing, but the who we are is changing
Yeah.
in a way that I find like really exciting and generative. And it's one of the things that like makes me very excited about the future when you can read the book and think that I like hate the future. I swear I don't.
Yeah, I love that you find it as a positive thing, and I do too. But many people find it the opposite, right? They're like, "Why do we have all these new words? Why all this new language? What's pansexual, omnisexual, and demisexual?" And it's like, you know what? Just whatever works.
I was going through these files once from like the 30s, and this guy was like, "What the fuck is this gay? Gay. What are we supposed to be? Happy? You
Right.
know, I'm a homosexual." And I was
Right.
like, "Yeah, everyone's going to be pissy about language no matter what it is. Just what it
Exactly.
is."
It's true. There's this beautiful quote from Gerard Connolly about how you treat mistakes as evidence of desire, of survival, of how we get here. And I just thought that was really nice. And obviously, you like that quote because you put it on your Instagram. Uh, but looking back at your younger self, I was wondering when you were navigating early open or poly setups or all the mistakes that you talk about that you made in any kind of relationship. Um, do you look at that now with a sort of gratitude and tenderness, or do you see those as regrets? And how do you deal with those things? I think many people, when they're grappling with the past, they either want to just tug it away, never look at it. And obviously, in a memoir, you can't do that. And you did grapple and investigate and excavate these things.
Yeah, I think that I had to write about them, right? Like that is the requirement. Maybe someone can write a book without grappling with their past and still write about it. There are some slick, funny little books that do that, but that was not going to be me. Um, Regrets are an interesting question. I certainly have a lot of things that, in looking back, I wish I had been capable of handling better. I wish I had done a better job. I wish I had thought about more people, how my actions were going to affect others. I endlessly, you know. But those often feel like learning moments where it was like you only know to do better because you haven't done better. And the most important part is like acknowledging it because then you can learn. It's like, what is that quote? I'm gonna butcher both the quote and who it's from because I don't even remember who it's from. But it's like not all problems that are faced can be solved, but no problem can be solved if it's not faced. And I think
Okay.
about that a lot in terms of, like, regret. It's like, yeah, I regret some of those things. The bigger regrets I have often are the places where, like, I did not think about something, I did not register my own, unhappiness with it, or I sort of like, applying to college. I certainly went to the wrong college. Had a great experience, no doubts. Met wonderful people, brilliant education, but, like, it was the wrong place for me, and
I
I
love that
just
you
was
say it was a great
so
experience because reading this, you don't sound like it was a great experience.
I there were great parts,
By the way, it was Cornell.
absolutely. Oh, yeah, Cornell. I went to Cornell. Um, yeah, it was the wrong place for me, but, like, I grew up through that experience. I became who I am. Yeah, some days I think back and I'm like, you really needed to go to, like, a 1,000-person liberal arts school. But at the time, I was working a numbers game. I was like, "If I go to the biggest school possible, I will run into gay people." And that was the
Right.
goal. It worked, not as well as I thought it might, but so when bringing this sort of forward to, like, the question of relationships and poly and stuff like that, I do wish that I had, like, had the opportunity to do the things straight people do, the stupid dating in high school when it doesn't matter and you practice and you get your feelings hurt and you learn how to, like, deal with it and then you learn how to hurt other people's feelings and say you're sorry and you, like, learn to have sex slowly because you're 15 and not, like, thrown off the deep end at 22, But I don't know. I spend too much time thinking about all of those things, and it's just like a weight that bears you down. It's like it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't help me to regret those things. It helps me to analyze them.
Um, so in some past essays, you've jokingly referred to yourself as a bitter poly boy, at some point. And I'm wondering when you, in my bad, when you frame your journey into non-monogamy, how do you see your polyamorous relationships as a direct continuation of some of that 90s radical queer lineage? And I don't know,
Oh,
do you see it as a continuation?
absolutely. That one is like a definite yes. Like there was no one when I was growing up who was particularly interested in marriage. Marriage was not on the political agenda. It wasn't on the
Yeah.
social agenda. There were people who were interested in committed long-term relationships, some of them monogamous, right? But like the idea that this sort of like state sanctioned two-person monogamous relationship was your goal just wasn't there, you know? And moreover, so many people I know were kind of like exiled from the family, poor, you know, these things of like inheritance
Mhm.
and insurance and family, you know, all those things that go along with the reasons we get married were not there. And I knew so many like really incredible folks, both my age and older, who were like sex radicals, who had lived through the porn wars or the
Yeah.
AIDS crisis or before the AIDS crisis, and had really different ideas about sex, sexuality, how we establish relationships. You know, I think I was exposed, excuse me, very early on in that sense to like queer ideas about what a relationship could be or should be
Yeah.
or would look like. And definitely somebody gave me the ethical slut in like 1998, you know? So
Whoa,
like
way
there was a
before
lot of
me.
like,
Yeah, you you had good
it was
friends.
in conversation. I really did. The trouble with normal was also given to me, you know,
Yeah.
policing public sex. Uh, these people who were really thinking deeply about relationships and sex and queerness, and that was a great like platform to stand on. Even if you know, again, I was at Cornell. There's not a lot of practicing non-monogamy happening. There were very few gay people around at all. There wasn't a lot of dating, but at least I think it gave me some kind of like preparation for the life I went on to live and convinced me, you know, that there was nothing wrong with it or bad. I can even remember it's one of those memories that comes back to me over and over again. I never know what to do with it. I was having lunch one afternoon at the end of college, maybe I was a senior. The guy named Adam, whose last name I can't remember, really nice guy, super smart, and he was doing research on how domestic partnerships were really starting to be established in the US then. But he was looking at the French system, which at the time
Mhm.
was called the Pax, the something something civilité, these agreements between people, and I don't know where it was. I think that it was still being legislated, and he was doing research as it was actively happening. But he was talking about, you know, how they were working to try and get the pacts to extend to three unmarried sisters who lived together or other kinds of relationship. We didn't quite have the language for this, but basically he was saying like the government has an interest in making sure people are cared for. And that is not about a sexual relationship. And that is a better system, you know? And that was like one lunchtime conversation with another queer person. It was not something I was taught in school. It was not something I read in a book, but it was something I learned through my school, through other queer people.
Yeah. Well, I will say that's one good part about you going to a larger school is that you had those types of conversations. I did go to a small liberal arts school in the South with 1,000 students, and I was, like, super out in the 90s at college and trying to have sex with everybody that I could on campus and off campus. But we didn't have gender studies or queer studies or anything like that, and you even talk about a professor who basically is telling you, like, "You're never gonna get anywhere like this, young man." And that was interesting because I do remember that feeling as well of like, kind of hide yourself a little bit, like assimilate, just try to get along and you'll get a little farther. And I had a lot of role models of those types of gay men around me, right? I think they were
Yeah.
closeted professors, but I never got to talk to them about any of that. Um, and so when people talk about how things haven't changed since the 90s, I think at least that has changed. Like I can openly talk about having being in a same gender relationship or having a husband or any of those kind of things, whereas I never felt that way when I was
Yeah.
in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that teacher was one of the most radical teachers we had, and she still and she was correct. You know, that like entering into the academy was going to be a process of assimilation and domination, and I was never going to feel easy or comfortable there. And of course, things change. I change, the academy changes, everything changes. But I could see from her experiences of what it was like being like the kind of like out radical on campus. And it was one of like being mocked by the conservatives on campus, people protesting her classes,
Mhm.
her, it just felt like she was a little mean, but that the meanness had a point.
Right.
And so much of the '90s and early 2000s, there a lot more meanness. I feel like meanness has kind of, um, to a degree, moved out of the culture and directly into politics. Like that's now where the government is the one who's going to be really mean to you. But
Right.
like your 30-minute comedies and your drag queens are not going to be like. I kind of miss the days where you should be a little frightened going to a drag show.
Oh
The
my
queen
gosh.
might pick on you. That is what I wanted out of a drag show.
Yes, you expected it, and it could be cruel. It
Yeah.
was definitely intense.
They were a kind of truth teller, who, like, broke all
Yeah.
the rules, made everyone feel awkward, and disordered the space around them, and I love that, and, of course, I love drag as it is now. I love these giant performances, these costumes that cost $10,000, these production numbers with 12 backup dancers, and 3 wig reveals, but it's a different thing.
Yeah, I was going to Charlie Brown's Cabaret, which was in Atlanta, and it was every night of the week and very high level, but some of the jokes, when I think back on them, like, they really make you cringe because they were racist, definitely making fun of any kind of gender nonconformity, any kind of anything, but, I mean, they were also our clowns and jesters, so they were doing their thing. I wanna play a clip. You do such a wonderful job of narrating your audiobook. If people haven't listened, they should listen to Hugh narrate My
Mhm.
Bad. This comes near the end. It's at the chapter "A Home at the Beginning of the Apocalypse," and it gets into the whole poly stuff. So I'm gonna play this for a sec.
The 90s. We wanted people to take us as legitimate, and we did what queer people have always done to fit in, tried to seem less dirty and more straight. So we smoothed our meat slut into a meat cute as we began, once again, in our 30s, the process of coming out. The beginning was rough. No one, including us, thought we were possible. Queer history is full of non monogamous relationships, but the decades of AIDS and assimilation had tarnished those ways of living. If you were in an open relationship, you were a slut, and your relationship was probably on the rocks anyway. If you wanted to live communally, you were naive and probably a college student or trust fund kid who'd never dealt with the real world. The word polyamory was only used in academia or on Tumblr. More often than not, well intended people called us polygamists instead. But the real difficulty wasn't the world, it was us. Me. This was not my first time at the side piece rodeo, and I knew the flavor of the month curdled fast. That's what I liked about it. I could enjoy all the trappings of someone else's relationship, the in jokes, the great sex, the well appointed apartment, and then skedaddle. My longest relationship up to that point was still the year I'd spent with Morgan when I was in college. And on my loneliest nights, it felt nice to warm myself by someone else's fire. I didn't often want to be in a relationship. Like friendships, they seemed like a lot of work, but fears of being old and alone still bayed at me.
So, there you go. How is it hearing yourself?
I'm mostly happy that I found a way to use the word skedaddle in that. That's my favorite part.
I also like the meet cute meet, that was a great
Slut.
line. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, so the just so people know, you've focused a lot of the talks that you've been giving over the last few months since the book came out on the early part of the book, and not as much has come up about this part, and it is the 21st century part. But tell us a little bit about why you felt the need to go there and how that developed.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out where exactly the book ends, and what really needed to happen was I had to figure out where it starts. There's this joke, in the theater community, if you think you have third act problems, you actually have first act problems, and that's I find always true in my writing. When I can't figure out the ending, it's that I haven't figured out exactly where I'm starting in the journey that I'm on. So this book went through many, many iterations in the writing. There was a lot. the first year was just writing out different ideas of what the essays might be and how they might go and what the overall theme was. And eventually I landed on that this book is really about explaining the perspective through which I do my historical work, which is like sort of forged in the 90s where I come up, but has these all these long tails that continue after because nothing is ever done. You know, like trauma in
Mhm.
the body, but also just like that's the way the world is. These things take a long time to resolve. So I knew that that was a big part of it. This sort of like, how did I get my point of view? But when I was trying to think about exactly where it ended, it made the most sense to kind of bring in this part of my life that not just the poly stuff, but the like queer communal home that I live in and how that this life, this relationship has enabled me to do the historical work. So it's like the rest of the book is like, where did this perspective come from? How did I
Right.
evolve my way of thinking? And the end is like, what does that lead me to? And how does that allow me to create a life that then allows me to live in that perspective, write from that
Mm.
perspective, be in that perspective. So it's like if everything else is the lead up, this is the landing. This is where like not that I'm, gonna die tomorrow, but this is like the end of that story. It concludes it in a way that felt necessary and also shows how taking all these things that like I've learned, I've said I've grown through. It's like I always say in nonfiction, if you're going to tell me you learned something, if you're going to tell me something mattered and it involved you as a person, then you need to show me how you changed. And
Mhm.
if I was going to say that I learned all this stuff and I changed in all these ways and I'd become a different person through all of this journey in the 90s and the early 2000s after, I need to show it for it to be real to the reader. And this was the biggest sort of way that I could show it. And also, it's like I don't think I could have written any of my books without my partners and our house and the collective
Mhm.
that I live in. It's like this has enabled me to center myself, to ground, to spend time, to focus, to not worry about moving all the time or like,
Mhm.
being out at bars, all of these things. And so it felt essential that the book end in this place. My younger brother, who's also a brilliant writer and a fantastic editor, he read a very late version of the book and he was
This is your gay
great.
brother.
Yeah, my gay brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was really great. He did a fantastic job. I gave it to him to do like a family read, like let me know if I'm going to fuck anything up or I've gotten anything wrong or I'm going to piss off the family. And he's like, yeah, that's fine. However, your first chapter is wrong. These two chapters are in the second person. They should be in the first person. And he was right about every single thing except that he said to cut the last chapter. And I was like, nope, that everything else you're right. I should cut out those other chapters and all this. But like, I felt that it was essential to kind of show what I become after all of this and, like preview or tease, maybe one day I'll write a second book, and that will be, I think, about our relationship and the world that I live in now.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, part of it is you explore how growing up, you're given a certain script by family and that sort of thing. And then you try, as you say, this moral improvisation to come up with a new script or new way of living. And you're kind of experimenting with all of these different things. And that is what allowed you, I assume, from what I've read and what I know of you, to from these 90s subcultures to be able to create this new, as you said, living in a queer collective, living in a poly relationship. And and I think that's what's essential for people to understand is that there's a whole process that went into this. You didn't just come out uh eventually just like ready to do this. Like it took a lot of trial and error and a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, yeah, and that oftentimes I wasn't able to see where I was learning good things or bad things. Like, I think that I say this in the very beginning of the book, but one of my biggest frustrations in historical work about like queer people in the 90s or the 80s is that often there's this level of clarity, right? Like
Mhm.
the decisions might be right, the things they do, but it's accompanied by this like profound sense that from the very beginning they know who they are, they know the right words, they know who they're not, they know what they want, they have just a clarity of the self that I just didn't experience at that time, and I think a lot of us didn't experience.
Yeah.
And that felt so essential to kind of like get at this sort of like going from incoherence to a form of coherence.
Well, I also think that you do a great job of explaining this undoing of shame. And, that's one of the things I think most everybody, even if they don't realize it, is working with, especially queer people are normally working with. And yeah, I want to kind of find out from you. did your other research in your other books also help you with that, realizing that this isn't a new thing? Um, because you were looking at 100 years of Brooklyn, for example, or you were looking at, all these things people were doing. You were looking at these people who were put into this detention center. Then you're looking at the same kind of, I'll be dramatic for a second, same kind of prison that you're put into
Mhm.
by growing up a certain way and then having to battle against that. But I think undoing shame is something that is the big battle for most of us,
Yeah.
and it never ends probably.
No, I don't think so. And I do think that the research into these other books that I've written was very helpful at giving me role models, but also it just like tearing apart, I think, a lot of the ideas that I received around like what a relationship looks like or what gender is, or maybe even more than anything else, these ideas that nothing changes, like
Mhm.
things might change, but like gay people as we know them exactly today have always existed throughout history, or like it just it freed me to kind of say like, yeah, people have had really different ideas in the past, different ideas about how to live, about what it means to live, about what a body is, about what gender is, and that was so freeing to understand that if 150 years ago people thought about things absolutely differently than I think about them today, well, then that means that 150 years from now, people are going to look back and be like, "Whoa, that is so
Yeah,
weird," you know. I've been doing this book club for a little while with Peppermint, the entertainer,
yeah.
and we did a book called Straight Acting, which was a history of William Shakespeare's like queer world. So it wasn't really about Shakespeare so much as like here are the ideas Shakespeare would have been encountering in his time period that helped him to write the like queer works that we know today. And Will Tosh is the author. It's a great book, a little academic, but really smart. Um, and he brought up this point where he was like, you have to understand, in Shakespeare's time, an educated man, like we kind of assume Shakespeare probably was just because of what's in the work, um, he would have believed that the body was made up of humors that are kept in balance, and that when those humors get profoundly imbalanced, you can change sex. Right? So he lived in a world where a normative understanding for all people was that it is possible for human beings to change sex under certain conditions.
Mhm.
That is not a shared understanding we have today, right? It's an understanding some of us have, but even the mechanism by which that change happens, we have a different idea about that. But we don't think about that when we approach Shakespeare's work, like when you're in high school and they're showing it to you, people are like, "Oh, like there's all these ideas about gender play in it because, they were dumber back then and they couldn't recognize a drag queen or it's like all of these things like no, they had very different ideas.
Yeah.
And that's freeing. That allowed them to live differently from us. It allows us to live differently from them. And it allows people 150 years from now to live totally differently from us. And that I think is how we get free, is to like
Right.
accept that we live in time and that almost there's nothing that exists outside of culture and our interpretation of it.
But the other thing, in that vein that I wouldn't say about this is that I've been really impressed watching you basically, as you say here, coming out over and over again about your relationship, because that can't be easy. I remember for years I would never talk publicly about my open relationship. I would only talk about it with my close friends, right? And but at professionally in public events or anything, there would never be that discussion, And you're doing it. Obviously, your parents know your partners,
Mhm.
and they're there and they're supportive, but but just watching that, even for me, is just really inspiring because I know how hard that can be, right? Of saying, "How far am I gonna go with it's sharing my private my personal life?"
Yeah, the hardest thing honestly was I had a day job for a long time. I've left it now, but I had it for 20 years, and it was a great place, super lefty, wonderful people, but I'm just not someone who wants to share my life with the people I work with. Work is work. Work is where I go to earn a living. I don't want to make it problematic with anything else, like I just want to have an easy time in my job. And often that leaves me a little cut off from my coworkers.
Mhm.
Put up a lot of walls. I think this is both true of a lot of queer people and other people too. But I had this boss when I was in college who really taught me a lot about queer life and organizing and politics and how we work for social justice. And her partner, Candace, said to me, she was like, I am out at work as a political action. She was like, I do not want to talk to these people. I don't want them to know I'm a lesbian, but I feel the need to do this. When I had come out to sort of like everyone else in my life, 15 years ago about this relationship and my two partners, work was the hardest jump for me to do it. Not that I thought they'd be bad in any way about it. I just It's like I wanted to just not have to deal with that. And then, I sort of remembered my political commitments and all the people before me whose actions for visibility made my life possible. And I was like, nope, I've got to do this. Just is what it has to be. But that was definitely like after my family, that was the next hardest coming out.
Mm. The other thing you're mentioning the workplace, and you do a really good job in the book talking about how through assimilation and actually even through mainstreaming of queer life, we've lost so many of the organizations and institutions that once supported many people who are marginalized. And I, I guess you said at the beginning, like, you do have hope for the future. What do you think in that regard? I mean, that we do still have some of these larger organizations, right? Many people hate
Yeah.
them, and they receive a lot of the money, and yet these smaller ones have either been absorbed or disappeared. And do you have any hopes for those types of? I guess we'll say like mutual aid or something, where we're doing things at a grassroots level.
I do have some hopes. A lot of things like, yes, we've lost so many bars, we've lost so many bookstores, but like the bookstores are opening up again. The bars I don't think are going to be the way they were, but there are these roving parties and there are other kinds of parties. I
Yeah,
think that for like the last 20 years, we've been in this unfortunate interstitial where it's like we have been giving away a lot of our private for good reasons. We can now go to lots more bars, so you don't have to just go to one bar, and we can have queer book launches at like mainstream bookstores and also the biggest indie bookstores in the world. So you don't necessarily need to do it at the LGBT Center on 13th Street, right? In all these ways, there are good things that are happening that necessarily end up with us putting less effort into our private spaces. But this is also true of like everyone and everywhere because of cell phones and the internet, right? That like we are investing so much more time into this world that we go through in our pocket, and not in the physical and experienced world. And for those of us who grew up with one way of doing things and then this new way came in as we were already kind of like adults, I don't think we transitioned very well. I think we shut ourselves down. We remembered everything that was frustrating about that old world as we dove into the new one and kind of let that one die a little bit. And I think the younger folks are having a much more nuanced relationship, right? Like, yes, I am worried about AI. I am worried about the kids in so many ways, but I think that they also, the youngest, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, are the ones who are starting to say like, okay, maybe I do want to be able to use location services, but I also want to take like days of the week where I don't use my phone at all. How do we move into a world where we have both private and public? Social media, as you and I grew up through it and with it, is dead today. So much of what happens on Instagram and Facebook, and I assume on Twitter, though I'm not there, is like brands making pronouncements and people
yeah.
you don't know whose content you're following. It's a broadcast medium. It's not a connecting medium in the same way. And I think that now we need to find other ways to connect. We need to figure out new mechanisms, right? If we're going to like destroy all the newspapers and we can't all afford to like have 700 individual subscriptions to journalists, it's like new things have to be forged.
Yeah.
And queer lives are part of that, that we have got to find these ways to create spaces that are both like separate for us, where we get to be in one way, and then also take up space in the world as a whole. Here's an example I use a lot. When I moved to New York City, 2001, I immediately went to the LGBT Center in Manhattan to volunteer and plug in. That's how I was going to meet queer people. Lots of other ways too, but I wanted to have like this like really like firm home in the city. And I got like a gig, a volunteer gig helping do PR and graphic design for their dances because the LGBT Center had these big dances that lots of people went to, and we advertised them in the free weeklies, HX and Next. And that seems almost unimaginable to me now. That this time period where lots of people go for their social lives to the LGBT Center just doesn't exist. They also had this long running program called Second Tuesdays for like 40 years. Second Tuesdays was the longest running queer cultural program in the world. Uh, and it died a few years ago. And then there was like very little cultural programming happening at the center. But the Bureau of General Services Queer Division has opened up there, and they're bringing back kind of programming. And yes, it's smaller, and yes, it's niche, and yes, it takes a lot of work to keep them there. But it has taken the center from this like moment where like it was where all queer culture had to happen because we didn't have other options, through a place where like less and less of it was happening until it was almost no cultural services and all social services. And now we're remembering, like, actually, no, it means something to have queer cultural programming in queer spaces, right? We're remembering what we lost. And that's so much what I think I wanted my book to do, was to like
Mhm.
present an accounting, to not say like, oh, we're so bad now, or oh, we were so bad then, but rather to say like, here's what we had, here's what we have now, here's how that trade-off happened.
Yeah. No, I love that you say that. I agree. I also do feel like my younger students always are teaching me things, and they are really worried about surveillance, want that to stop. They really wanna get off social media, but don't know how.
Yeah.
And but they're very into analog, right? That's why people are into thinking that the '90s is somehow this great time, even though it wasn't,
Yeah.
uh, because we did have cool things.
Yeah, Dan Kois, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, at Slate
Uh,
Magazine, wrote this article. I'm just trying to fill it. It was like it was, "Oh, put your phone on silent and party like it's 1996." And his basic contention, which I love, is that the phone part of the problem right now is that the phone allows you to imagine what is happening somewhere, make backup plans, change your mind, do all of these things, that feels in each individual moment in which we do it like we are maximizing our joy, making sure we won't be uncomfortable, making sure we're going to something that we enjoy. But in the cumulative, it means that we are anxious about where we're going, always trying to guess who's going to be there, not willing to go unless we see other people in location services that are there already, changing our plans halfway through, starting off the day, having a plan for dinner, but knowing we could always text that person in an hour and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And we've had that same feeling ourselves so many times. So of course we forgive the person who does it to us. But like in all those ways, it going out is a very different experience now than it was when I was young, where you made a plan, you went out, and maybe that plan totally failed, but you
yeah,
couldn't make a new one on the fly. And my
yeah.
students, I work with a lot of these like younger students who are helping me transcribe interviews. And this summer, one of my students was transcribing an interview where someone was like saying like basically like, oh, my night had been bad and I wasn't sure what to do, but it was a Thursday, so I went to such and such bar because that's where we went on Thursdays. And the student, he was like, this has come up in every single interview. This idea that there are like places that you just go because you'll probably run into other people you like, or even if you don't run into other people you like, things will happen. And he's like 20, 21, junior, and he was like, I've literally never had that experience, and no one I know has that experience. There is no like, oh, you just go to this place to go to this place. Everything is like programmed,
Yeah,
and I was like, yeah, that's, I think, a huge change. It adds a level of anxiety to everything. Everything must be planned in a way where like I haven't planned anything for like 20 years of my life.
yeah. In the comments I saw, Brandon Elrich has said, "I've seen 2 different live queer dating streams on TikTok," so I guess people are also doing that. Um, I have one more question. If anybody has anything that they wanna ask Hugh before we wrap it up, let us know. But, I just wanted to ask for the writers who are listening, for the emerging queer writers who are trying to document their own complex coming of age narratives and look at all this, how do you have any advice for them to have care and honesty when they're dealing with their chosen family, their partners and exes and all that? Because that is a big thing everybody always asks about writing memoir, and how do you do that with care? And I'm sure you had to navigate that
Mhm.
as well. As you said, you had your brother read it for your family, but you've also had your partners and other people. But there's always going to be somebody who gets hurt, or something that maybe they think is too glib, or they wish that you had mentioned them and you don't.
I got that, definitely. I saw Melissa Febos talk a few years ago, and she said this, and it was so right. She was like, look, if you write a memoir, people are going to be annoyed at you, but you don't know who those people are. So you can do everything in life to sort of like work out the ones you think are going to be upset and how to work around that. And it's going to be someone you never even considered. And on top of that, the people who are like true narcissists who are mad at you are going to be mad at you no matter what. They will
Right.
find a character that has nothing to do with them and they will see themselves in it. They will find a character that has everything to do with them and not see themselves in it. Like there's only so much you can do. So what I ended up doing was sort of like sitting with it. At the very first, when I started to write, I was thinking of it as my historical work. And I was like, I know this process. I go interview everyone. I find every different version of the story. Then I try to put them, and that was a mistake. When I tried to do that, I started to very quickly lose what I was trying to capture, which was my point of view and how it had grown and changed over time. Other people's ideas were important, but because I was learning them at the end moment, then trying to put them into the moments in which I experienced where I thought entirely different things, it sort of ruined anything what I was trying to grab. So I realized that what I needed to do was think about who got to have a say in the story I wanted to tell? Who was I willing to, even if I did not agree with them, even if I thought that their version of it was wrong, but who got to read the book and say, like, this is what I think, and this is what, I need to be okay with this book. And that was a very short list. And
Mhm.
that list, they got it. They got it early. They got it while I was writing. I repeatedly checked in with them. I was like, and everyone else, the next level was like, okay, who do I need to talk to about this book once it's done? And there could be no more changes made because I am not making changes for them. But I do also want to talk them through it before it's out in the world and other people read it. And those were kind of the two levels. I figured out who existed on each level and how to work with them. And then everyone else got to read the book when it came out in the world.
Yes. And that's a good way of doing it. And then the other thing you can always tell people is you can write a lot of things and you don't have to publish everything. So you can also just get things out and don't have to share it with the world if you need to.
Oh, yeah. I told myself the whole way through, I was like, okay, I'm writing the truth right now, but that's just so I understand what the truth is and my perspective. Later, I'm going to go back through and I'm going to lie about everything. I'm going to edit it all out, make it easier, make it, less crazy, less unhappy, I was like, I had to tell myself that on every single page. Just be like, nope, you can lie later. Tell the truth right now.
Well, if there's any of those pieces that you cut and you want to share them with the Queer Love Project, let me know. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really wonderful. Just so that if you're listening to this on a different platform and you don't already know, the Queer Love Podcast is part of the Queer Love Project. You can subscribe to us at queerloveproject.substack.com. You should go and find My Bad. It's wonderful, but you should also read all of Hugh's books. And Hugh, is there another book that's going to be on the horizon that you want to tell us about?
Well, not another book right now, though I've been working on this long-term research project on the queer avant-garde of the East Village in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that will be a book one day. It's just taken a little while. But I just took on a new role as the lead historian at the American LGBTQ plus
Yes.
Museum, which we don't open until 2028. So if you're hearing this and you're like, the what? You've got 2 years, but you'll be invited to our opening. We're gonna be part of the new New York Historical Society's building right on Central Park West. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and I am helping to design the core exhibit, which is
Oh,
going to
nice.
be a, like, set look at, like, the history of queer identity in the United States of America. It's an idea that I've been working on. In some ways, it kind of takes all of my books and including the East Village one that is not yet written, and draws the through line that I sort of see in identity and understanding in America from doing all of that work. So it feels like I've been given a capstone project to my own writing. So yeah, this will be written in objects and in screens more than words, but that's my next big project.
And of course, you're going to end up having to deal with the jokes that you're the Billy Eichner character from Bros, but the real one.
But I
So,
actually like that movie, so, like, I'll take those jokes, except for the Deborah Messing. Deborah Messing there needs to be a non-Deborah Messing cut, but aside from that,
all right. Well, we are excited about that, and I am looking forward to it. So, thank you. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you, Hugh. And talk to you soon.
thank you
Bye.
so much, Jerry. Bye, everybody.